I mentioned the Gibsonian statement that technology is what drives change in culture. You were in Toronto at the time that Marshall McLuhan was having his heyday, and I'd always wondered what, if any, influence he was on you. And I read the book with great interest, looking to see if his name popped up in its pages, and it did not. So I'm simply going to ask you, since we're here in Toronto, whether that kind of whether he was on your radar at that time when you were here.
He was, very much. I didn't understand. I was talking about this in Key West, Florida last week with Doug Copeland. And we were both at the
you live in the same town. You don't have to go all the way to Key West to have a chat. You want to grab a coffee? Okay, we'll go to Key West.
We bounce around. He lives on the other side of a bridge.
Oh, well.
So I don't know. North Van, it's not the same city, really. But because of his recent McLuhan biography, we were talking about McLuhan, and I was recollecting as how when I was here, in my late teens, there was the Beatles were coming out of every every store's sound system. But also, frequently, this cultured voice saying unbelievably weird gnomic things. The medium is the massage. What? And I'd say, who is that man? And my Canadian friends would say, oh, that's Marshall McLuhan, man, he's a trip. I'd say, well, what is he? And they say, I don't know, he's a university professor or a philosopher or something, but he's a trip. And there was a lot of his rhetoric was floating around, amid the general rack and ruin of the children's revolution. And I paid some attention to it. It reminded me of something. I wasn't sure what. Like I sort of, put him in the basket with J.G. Ballard and Burroughs and a few other advanced practitioners whose work was interesting, but I wasn't entirely sure that I actually understood it. I probably would have pretended to if you had asked me. Actually, when I think about that time in my life, I'm reminded of what Thomas Pynchon wrote in the introduction to Slow Learner, his short story collection, which was published rather late in his career. And he said, well, if I met that young man today, I might buy him a beer, but I wouldn't loan him any money.
Absolutely. Well, I mentioned earlier that we're very different writers. I sometimes teach creative writing. One of the things I tell my students to do is figure out what they're trying to say, have their thematic statement, and make sure that the novel or the short story supports that. And I even say as an exercise, if you want to find a way to focus your energies, write the book review, don't show it to anybody, but write the book review you're hoping your book is going to get, and then test every line, every paragraph, every page, every chapter against that review to see if you're earning it. And you wrote something here that's diametrically opposed, which is certainly equally valid, and I will read it to you. This is in relation to Zero History, but I think it applies to all your novels. I wish that I could tell you what it's about, but I haven't yet discovered my best likely story about that. That will come with reviews, audience and bookseller feedback, and booksellers are especially helpful in that way. Along with these, however many interviews, these things will serve as a sort of oracle, suggesting to me what it is I've been doing for the past couple of years.
Well, I think I carried relatively few things with me out of my 4 years at UBC as an English honors student. And one of them was something that E.M. Forster wrote in aspects of the novel, to the effect that he believed that a writer in control of her characters isn't really even close to doing the full job. He didn't think that he was really doing it until the characters were out of his control. The characters were dictating to him, and they were taking the work in directions that he would never have imagined. And I don't know why that impressed me so much prior to any experience of writing fiction. And I was never much of a big E.M. Forster fan. I haven't read that much Forster, but I found that essay very, very compelling. And so when I began to try to write, which is a weird process, and I'm sure it's different for everyone, and I don't actually think it can't be taught. You can just encourage people to continue to try. That was sort of one of the post-it notes on the inside of my skull. Am I in control of this? And if I'm not in control of it, am I, part of me in the beginning I was watching to think, okay, if I can do the Forster trick and get these characters to tell me a story that I don't even feel like I'm making up, is it really any better? I was like looking to see what the results would be, and I found that for me the results were way better when I just allowed myself to take dictation from some part of myself that I ordinarily had no conscious access to. And that for me became the real doing of the work. And it can happen in the first draft, or it can happen in the final rewrite. But some kind of something extra kicks in. And I don't think this experience is unique to me. I mean, I think this is like the muse. I think people have known about this for a long time. And to me, it feels like taking dictation, but I don't know what I'm taking dictation from. It's some aspect of myself that I cannot reliably summon. It only comes.
You've jacked into something.
Yeah, I'm jacked into something, and if I could get it, it's just whatever it is, it's not going to turn up all the time. And a lot of the writing time for me is simply waiting for it to turn up. My experience is if the conscious part of me that thinks about story and motivation and wonders what the story is about, if that part of me were to sit down and outline something, it wouldn't be very good. It wouldn't be up to somehow to my standards. I need the weird other part to check in. I need the stranger to sign in and give me the marching orders. And sometimes the stranger will do that and then go away, and I'll continue myself to follow the orders just to see where it'll go. I guess I don't know where I got that from. It's like a faith in the unconscious, that the part of me that's conscious and rational isn't by any means the majority of myself.
One of the other ways we differ is that I'm often referred to as an optimistic writer, and you're sometimes referred to as a pessimistic writer. You write here in reference specifically to Orwell, but it applies generally. If you wish to know an era, study its most lucid nightmares. In the mirrors of our darkest fears, much will be revealed. But I want to ask you, because that is, of course, I think, an excellent encapsulation of a lot of what you do, what it is that you're optimistic about these days. And it'll be the last question, so we'll be opening it up to the audience here. You can start thinking about what you want to ask. But I'd like to hear a positive, sunny thing from Bill Gibson to I know your name is Great Dismal online, and I know the sky is the color of television tuned to a dead channel, but you know, in my novel, Wake, I refer to the fact that since you wrote that in 1984, it's now, when you tune television to a dead channel, you get a bright, cheery blue. So tell me what you're optimistic about, William Gibson.
Well, you know, to qualify it all, it's always seemed, I've always been a bit frustrated with the characterization of my work as dystopian, down. And I saw my work from the beginning as being stubbornly, almost pathetically optimistic, because when I began to write, any intelligent person on the planet went to bed every night expecting that the next day might be our last. Right. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a kind of psychotic mutual death grip, and they had more active nuclear warheads and guys with their fingers on the trigger. It was unimaginably awful. The psychic toll that the entire world paid in that, we'll never know. But one of the interesting things about it is as soon as that went into chill mode, it's like we all forgot. People my age, it's like we forgot. It's hard to remember. It's hard to believe. Younger people have no idea. So in 1981, when I started writing Neuromancer, I made a very conscious choice to depict a world in which full-on nuclear destruction had not happened. And I viewed that as wildly optimistic.
Fair enough.
There's a little in the history, the backstory of the world of Neuromancer. There's been a brief, like 2-day, sort of half-assed nuclear war that's taken out Bonn and maybe a couple of cities in the Soviet Union, and the multinational corporations go, oh, wait a minute, this can never happen again. You know, you're not doing this anymore, and they take over. And you cannot prove, and this is another thing I did very deliberately with Neuromancer, you cannot prove from internal evidence in Neuromancer that the United States exists as a nation state. And my assumption was that the multinationals neutered it because they were so angry that the world in which they made their money was almost destroyed. It seems the United States in Neuromancer seems to be a congeries of city-states controlled by multinational corporations. So it's still there geographically, but it doesn't even seem to have its own government, or you can't prove it does. It's like the New World Order that the survivalists were scared of, but for real. And so I actually thought, you know, from my point of view, that was optimistic. But the main thing that bugged me about the characterization of my work as dystopian is that today, as then, all over the world, there are people living in situations that are infinitely worse than anything I've ever depicted, and they will for the rest of their short, miserable lives. And any of those people would immigrate to the sprawl in a wink, and they would be so much better off.
Absolutely.
The only people who can view Neuromancer as a dystopia are people living in a condition of extraordinary privilege.
Absolutely.
So it's, you know, that's what I think.
Oh, and on that wonderful note, absolutely, very well said. The book we're here talking about tonight is the first nonfiction work in book form by Globe and Mail and New York Times bestselling author William Gibson. It's called Distrust that particular flavor, we're at the Appel Salon at the Toronto Reference Library. Bill is here courtesy of his Canadian publisher, Penguin Canada. We will take questions. You do have to come up to the microphone in the center aisle there. While we wait for somebody to come up, a hand for Mr. Gibson, please.
Thank you.
My pleasure, Pat. Absolute pleasure.
Very kind.
Yes, please, exactly right. Please queue up there if you want to have a question. You have the floor, sir.
In your story, The Hologram Rose, your central figure is abandoned by his girlfriend, and when he examines the closet, the only thing that's left of her is a broken sandal strap. And Leonard Cohen had a song roughly at the same time in which he describes his character, I stand in ruins behind you with your winter clothes, your broken sandal straps. Did one of you get it from the other? Were you both dating the same girl?
No, I wanted it. I got it from Cohen, but I wanted Cohen's line to resonate with any reader who read that line. Now, in fact, that was the first piece of fiction I was ever able to finish in my life, and it's until tonight. It's taken until tonight for anyone to get it.
Hat off to you, sir. Thank you.
Actually, I just read it last night.
If only you'd gotten to it decades sooner, sir. Next gentleman in line, please.
Hi. Well, basically what I wanted to ask you about is, in the Sprawl trilogy, we see a world set in a not-so-distant future, especially for me, being a younger person. And I liked how you described it tonight as Reaganomics turned up to 11, and just basically with increased multinational corporations kind of calling the shots, transnational capitalism or whatever. I just wondered, do you think there's any way to stop that kind of a world from becoming a reality? Do you think it's just kind of inevitable at this point, this idea of inexorable progress towards something that favors that kind of environment?
No, I don't think it's necessarily impossible to stop things moving in that direction, but I'm not very practically minded, and I can't give you a program for the resistance. I can only offer you hope.
Thank you so much. Next question, please.
Well, I was just about to ask for the program for the resistance, but I guess what I'll ask is, because I guess our apocalypse is maybe something to do with global warming, maybe. So I'm just wondering, I guess, give my generation whatever you want that you think is helpful to survive.
Well,
Save us, Bill. Save us.
well, it's good to keep it. It's good. I think it's good. It's good. It may not be helpful, but it's good to keep it. It's good to keep in mind that you get some 1880s, some German mechanic is in his garden shed after dinner, tinkering with something that's going to become the internal combustion engine. He doesn't step back, scratch his head, look at this thing and think, maybe I shouldn't do this, because what if this totally messes with the global climate? And the problem, that illustrates the problem of the law of unintended consequences, and these are the unintended consequences of emergent technologies. We don't legislate technologies into emergence, for the most part. It doesn't happen that way. They're pulled into the world by something like the invisible hand of the market. They happen because someone thinks they can do it and someone else thinks some money can be made. And the people who invent them have perhaps very fine and high-minded ideas of what that invention can do. But nobody knows what humanity will do with any technology until humanity gets its grubby little mitts on it and starts doing what the street does with whatever it finds. And those things can't readily be anticipated. And those things tend to be where the real changes come. So, I would say, another particular flavor you should do. Well, my advice would be that another particular flavor you should always distrust is somebody sitting on stage or standing behind a podium offering you a program to counter the inexorable decline of civilization. Because people who do that, by and large, can be like stone evil. You really they have been in the past, so watch out.
Thank you. Thank you. Sir.
Zero History was a lot about the secret brand, the brand that you can't just get with money, and even if you have a ton of money, you might not even recognize its value or worth. And then in Distress, that particular flavor, there's one of the essays that's about how this affinity between the Japanese and the English with these types of objects. I think it was watches in particular. I'm wondering if you could tell us what you think it is about these two cultures that creates this sort of like otaku level fascination with these objects, and why maybe North American culture isn't as fascinated with them, if you think that's the case. Both England and Japan have a great deal of what Freud, in my very or possibly only favorite Freudian idea, called the narcissism of small differences. And the narcissism of small differences you can see every day on the street, because it's the basis for male fashion coding in our society. Men are walking around, you think they're just wearing brown suits, but there's like a million tiny things. And in England or Japan, that's evolved to an extraordinary level where one man could recognize across the room that the other man, the cuff button on the other man's suit actually unbuttons, even though it's buttoned. And that's like a major price and status difference in the old code. And that stuff interests me because I think we do a lot of stuff ourselves that's parallel to that, and a lot of marketing and branding, which is a huge part of what we do to make a living in this culture, operates at that level. And part of my fascination with it is just something that I'm fascinated with. I don't find it repellent or anything. It's just I find it kind of marvelous, one of those strange things that human beings do. And it's I once heard Brian Eno's definition. He was explaining his definition of culture,
to someone, and it's the best definition I've ever heard, and he said it's everything we always do that we don't really need to do at all.
I think Tina's going to cut us off fairly soon. Perhaps we can get in one, if the question is brief and the answer is typically Gibsonian in its pithiness.
Okay, way back when in an interview with Sheila Rogers, you described the artistic benchmark that you held up Count Zero against as a tune or album by John Cale. And then in your last couple of fictional works, music and musicians have played a large part. I just wondered if you had a soundtrack or a set of tunes that you could lay on us for Zero History and the one before it.
Just before you talk, Tina is giving me the eye. You find folks who are in line here probably should take a seat. I apologize that we didn't get to all the questions, but Bill will give us an answer to that.
I don't as clearly.
We could do one more. Whoever was the last person in line would get to take it.
I don't as clearly have a soundtrack. In fact, it wouldn't even make any sense. I was listening to a lot of drive-by truckers while I was writing that, who were an indie southern band I'm hugely admiring of. And they've got like at one point they had 3 absolutely brilliant songwriters in one band, which is something you don't often see. But there's often very little, I don't think people could make much of the relationship of what I'm listening to when I'm writing a particular thing. But I do sometimes sort of seize on some particular piece of music and kind of put it up as a standard above the word processor. It's something a tone to sort of shoot for.
Before we get to the final question, I'll point out at the back of the room, Back of Phoenix Books, celebrating its 40th anniversary this year, is here, of course, to let people take home copies of Bill's book tonight. Our booksellers tonight are Christine Sago and Robert Herrera. Go up and say hello to them after this gentleman's question is answered.
Very quick technical question. Do you write quickly, slowly? Do you rewrite a lot?
I write very slowly and I rewrite endlessly.
Thank
I
you.
rewrite endlessly. I believe, this is not really a quote, but something that William Butler Yeats expressed to the effect that literary revision is virtually the only time a man ever is able to improve himself.
Thank you.
Wonderfully said. Thank you all so much for joining us.